On December 7, 1971, the town of Westfield, New Jersey, bustled with holiday preparations. Streets were decked out with festive decorations. With the approach of winter, an ominous feeling seemed to settle over the community. A grand mansion, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, had started to catch the attention of local residents. Week after week, there was no sign of life within the house. Strangely, the lights remained on around the clock, a detail that puzzled and unsettled neighbors. Adding to the eerie atmosphere, the sound of religious hymns echoed ceaselessly from within, sending chills through the community. As days passed, rumors about the mansion spread like wildfire. Finally, overwhelmed by concern, residents reached out to the police. No one could have anticipated the horror that awaited them. Inside the home, officers discovered a chilling scene. 5 of the 6 members of the devout List family lay brutally murdered. The gruesome discovery shocked the entire nation, a crime so horrific it felt like something from a nightmare. Authorities were left with questions. What had happened inside the mansion? And where was the 6th member of the List family? Westfield, New Jersey is a charming town celebrated for its quaint downtown, outstanding school system, and convenient access to New York City. It offers residents a refined suburban lifestyle with easy reach to the hustle and bustle of the metropolis. The town is lined with Victorian and colonial-style homes, its streets shaded by large trees preserving Westfield's historic character. With lush parks, golf courses, and numerous recreational facilities for all ages, it's a community residents are proud to call home. However, beneath its idyllic surface, Westfield bears a dark shadow from a gruesome crime that took place in 1971. The name Westfield has become entwined with the tragic fate of the List family. John List, born on September 17, 1900, was the son of John Frederick and Alma Barbara Florence, devout Lutherans of German immigrant descent. When John was born, his father was already 66 years old and his mother was 38. Growing up, John was raised in a strict religious household, which led to a strained relationship with his parents. His father was distant and his mother took full charge of his upbringing, requiring him to attend church regularly and discouraging him from any activities she deemed too risky or friends she considered unsuitable. John grew up repressed, isolated, and generally unpopular with his peers. At 18, he joined the Army. In 1943, John served in World War II and later in the Korean War. After returning home, he worked in accounting, eventually taking a position as a supervisor at a paper company. In 1951, at age 26, he met Helen Morris Taylor, a widow with a daughter named Brenda. They quickly fell in love, and shortly into their relationship, Helen told John she was pregnant. The couple married that same year, though it turned out to be a false alarm. After the wedding, John also discovered Helen had a non-contagious case of syphilis contracted from her late husband. Despite a rocky start, John and Helen settled into life together in Michigan, welcoming their first child, Patricia, on January 8, 1955. Their second child, John Frederick Jr., was born on October 21, 1956, and their youngest, Frederick Michael, arrived on August 26, 1958. Helen's health declined due to her past illness, eventually leading to blindness. The toll on her mental health was severe, resulting in depression and dependence on alcohol and medication. Meanwhile, Helen's daughter, Brenda, became pregnant at 16 and was sent to a home for young mothers. Hoping for a fresh start, John moved his family to New Jersey, purchasing an impressive mansion with financial help from his mother, Alma, who agreed to join them. In 1965, the List family settled into a grand 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield. Outwardly, they appeared to embody the American dream. John was active in the local church, even teaching Sunday school, and the family regularly attended church services. John was determined to maintain a flawless image for his family in the eyes of society. For a while, things seemed to go well for the Lists, but it was only a fleeting happiness. By early December 1971, neighbors noticed something strange. No one had seen the Lists in weeks, and all the mansion's lights were left on continuously. Concerned, they alerted the police. On Tuesday, December 7th, officers arrived and, finding no response, entered the mansion through an open window. Inside, the air was frigid, and a strong odor filled the space. Sacred music blared from a record player, adding an eerie tone to the grim silence. In the mansion's ballroom, they made a horrifying discovery. The bodies of Helen, aged 47, and her children, Patricia, 16, John Jr., 15, and Frederick, 13, were laid out in sleeping bags, their faces covered and evidently shot. The blood-soaked towels had been meticulously packed away. As officers searched further, they found Alma List's body in an attic room on the mansion's third floor. All 5 family members were dead, but one was missing, John List. In his bedroom, authorities found 2 handguns and a 5-page letter detailing his motives. Photos of the List family revealed a chilling detail. John's face had been meticulously cut out from each one. No trace of John could be found, and he seemed to have vanished entirely. Investigators followed a trail of blood leading to the kitchen and concluded that the victims had likely been killed there before their bodies were dragged to the ballroom. Police sent the bodies for autopsy and began analyzing physical evidence. Fingerprints collected from the weapons were preserved for examination. One of the guns had belonged to John's father, while the other had been purchased by John himself on October 14, 1971. This discovery led detectives to consider that the massacre might have been planned for some time. Initially, there was uncertainty about whether John was a victim or the perpetrator, but a letter found in his room confirmed his responsibility. The letter, addressed to the family's pastor, was dated November 7, 1971. In it, John confessed to killing his mother, wife, and children, shocking everyone who knew him. In the letter, John explained his desire to spare them from suffering and provided contacts of family and friends for the pastor to inform about the tragedy. "I know how this may seem to you, but I want you to know I took special care to ensure there was no pain," he wrote. The pastor described the Lists as regular churchgoers, noting that John even taught Sunday school. The letter also indicated that Helen and the children wished to be cremated, and John requested the pastor to arrange a modest funeral for them. As police interviewed neighbors, they uncovered a different side of the List family, revealing that their seemingly perfect reputation was merely a facade. Initially, the Lists were viewed as a typical ideal American family, disciplined, moral, and religious, highly respected in the community. But over time, neighbors began to notice odd behaviors, realizing that the lists weren't as perfect as they seemed. They were extremely religious and moralistic, yet they also appeared antisocial and somewhat strange. John's behavior, in particular, stood out. A neighbor recalled welcoming the family with a homemade cake, only to be told bluntly by John that his family wasn't friendly and asked to leave. This unwelcoming attitude was noticed by many neighbors over the years. One of Patricia's friends shared with police that John once tore a shirt off Patricia in a fit of anger, disapproving of her choice in front of others. Patricia reportedly felt that her father hated her. Another incident involved Patricia being brought home by the police after wandering the streets with a friend. When called to pick her up, John arrived in full formal attire, wearing a tuxedo in the middle of the night. His behavior with Patricia alarmed neighbors even further. He threatened her life and declared that their days were numbered. John's threats became increasingly frequent, and he occasionally asked his children if they preferred cremation or burial. These revelations led detectives to believe that John had likely been planning the murders for some time. As the investigation continued, detectives discovered that John had canceled newspaper and milk deliveries. The family hadn't attended church since November, and the school had been informed they'd be away caring for Helen's sick mother. These actions ensured that no one would suspect anything unusual at the mansion. On December 9, 1971, John's car was found parked near New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. It was a Chevrolet Impala with a parking ticket dated November 10, 1971. The police speculated that he might have taken a flight and possibly fled the country, though no records showed he had boarded any plane. The only certainty detectives had was that John was now a month ahead of them. The autopsy reports confirmed that each family member had been killed with the gun found in John's room. All had been shot once in the head, except for John Jr., who had been shot 10 times in the head, neck, and chest. This discrepancy puzzled investigators, as they questioned why John Jr. had met a more violent end than the others. The funeral took place on November 12, 1971. Alma List was buried in St. Lawrence Lutheran Cemetery in Frankenmuth, Michigan, while Helen, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick were laid to rest in Fairview Cemetery in Westfield, New Jersey. Their tombstone read, "Peace in the Eternal Valley." Undercover officers attended the funeral, hoping John might make an appearance, but he never did. The List family murders became a top priority for local authorities, who were determined to capture John List. His photograph was distributed widely across police departments nationwide, with hopes that someone might recognize him. Despite the extensive efforts, John List's whereabouts remained an enigma. Some detectives began to speculate that he might have taken his own life, overwhelmed by guilt. Yet, even after months of intense investigation, no solid leads emerged, and gradually the case went cold. Years passed, and as the original detectives retired, the morbid mystery of the List family fell to a new team of investigators. In 1988, new detectives took charge and decided to reopen it. They believed that bringing the case to a large audience might yield the breakthrough they needed. Their goal was to feature the story on America's Most Wanted, a popular show hosted by John Walsh, who became an advocate for victims' rights following the tragic death of his son, Adam. Initially, the show's producers were skeptical, thinking the case had faded from public memory and that John List was likely dead. But the detectives persisted, and by April 1989, the producers agreed to spotlight the case in an episode. To create a current likeness of John, the detectives collaborated with Frank Bender, a forensic sculptor skilled in reconstructing facial features. Bender used John's psychological profile, developed with the help of specialists to build a realistic representation of what John might look like in 1989. The question loomed over whether John would have changed his appearance, particularly his glasses, a distinctive feature. Some theorized that John might still wear thick, dark frames to project an intellectual or dignified image. John Walsh, deeply invested in victim advocacy, took the case to heart. He wanted a full understanding of John List to communicate his character effectively to viewers. Once the facial reconstruction was complete, the episode of America's Most Wanted aired on May 21, 1989, with the hope that new leads might emerge and finally close the case. Featuring John List as the prime suspect marked a turning point in the investigation. The program reached an audience of around 22 million viewers, making it the oldest case the show had ever covered, and its impact was massive. Alongside a photo of John, the episode presented Bender's lifelike facial sculpture, drawing significant media and public attention. Following the broadcast, over 200 tips poured in from across the country, underscoring the public's engagement. One tip, however, stood out from the rest. In Denver, Colorado, a woman and her daughter were watching the show when they noticed an uncanny resemblance between John List's profile and their neighbor, known as Bob Clark. As more information was revealed, they became convinced that Bob Clark was, in fact, John List. Bob fit the description almost perfectly. He was a Lutheran accountant, dressed conservatively, appeared well-groomed, and was notably reserved. He attended church regularly and, perhaps most telling, had a scar behind his ear. When the facial sculpture appeared on screen with striking accuracy, the women were certain. The glasses and cheeks were what really convinced us, they said. We thought, oh my God, that's Bob. The resemblance was so strong that they had no doubt Bob Clark and John List were the same person. On Thursday, June 1, 1989, just 11 days after the episode aired, one of them contacted the police with her suspicions. She explained that Bob had lived in her neighborhood with his wife, Dolores Miller, but had recently relocated to Richmond, Virginia. FBI agents quickly tracked down Bob Clark at his office in Richmond. When questioned, Bob confirmed his identity as Clark and denied being John List. However, authorities were convinced they had the right man and continued their investigation. A fingerprint comparison confirmed investigators' suspicions. Bob Clark was indeed John List. He was arrested on June 1, 1989. The forensic facial reconstruction used on America's Most Wanted was strikingly accurate. Nearly every detail matched John's appearance at the time, save for a few extra wrinkles. He even wore the same thick-framed glasses that the psychologist had predicted in the reconstruction. Under police questioning, John finally confessed the truth behind the horrific events he'd carried out. With this confession, the eerie story of the List family began to unravel, exposing the grim events that took place at the List house and the circumstances leading to one of America's most notorious murders. John List had been under immense financial strain, with the mansion's mortgage becoming an unbearable burden. Desperation drove him to steal money from his own mother, something he never imagined doing. Meanwhile, Helen struggled with her own issues, neglecting the children and seeking solace from a psychiatrist, even abandoning church, a move John considered unthinkable, fearing it would tarnish his family's pure Lutheran image. Facing a midlife crisis and the humiliating prospect of bankruptcy, John was consumed by dark thoughts. He convinced himself that the modern world was corrupting his family and leading them toward ruin. In his distorted logic, he believed only he could save them from this fate, and ending their lives was an act of mercy that would ensure their place in heaven. On November 9, 1971, John set his horrific plan into motion. He believed that by killing his family, he would receive God's forgiveness, as he was saving them from the devil's influence. That morning began like any other. The children went off to school and Helen had breakfast in the kitchen. John calmly approached her from behind and shot her, watching her collapse to the floor. He then dragged her body to the ballroom and laid it in a sleeping bag, signaling the start of his grim mission. Next, he visited his mother Alma on the mansion's third floor. She greeted him with a kiss, a moment of affection he answered with a fatal shot. Unable to move her body, he covered her face with a towel as if trying to mask his own guilt. John then went to the bank, closed his accounts, and sent letters to the school, all while displaying a chilling indifference to life. Returning home, he made himself a sandwich and waited for the children to come home. Patricia was the first to arrive, unaware of her fate. John shot her as she entered. The same happened to Frederick, whose young life was cut short as soon as he walked through the door. John Jr. was the last to arrive and fought for his life, but his father's relentless shooting, 9 shots in total, proved fatal. "With John, I just had to keep shooting," John would later say, as if recounting a routine task. That night, after placing his family's bodies in the ballroom, John cleaned the house, prepared dinner, and served it in the room where his family now lay lifeless. With religious music playing in the background, he ate one last meal in the mansion. After dinner, John prayed and went to bed, convinced he had completed his mission and achieved peace. The next morning, he adjusted the thermostat, turned on all the lights, and set religious music to play at full volume, creating the illusion that the house was still occupied. Then he vanished, taking on a new identity. In Denver, John List re-emerged as Bob Clark, living a low-profile life to escape the horrific past he left behind. But like a lurking shadow, his crimes would not stay hidden. Just as the police search began to wane and his life seemed to settle, John built a seemingly normal existence. He found work as an accountant, resumed church attendance, and in 1985 married Dolores Miller, a woman he met through their religious community. He told Dolores that his first wife had died of cancer, a lie she believed as she fell in love, unaware of the massacre he had committed. After his arrest, John initially insisted he was Bob Clark. However, while in custody, a prison guard overheard him confessing his crimes to Dolores. The guard reported this, triggering John's trial. During the trial, his defense argued that he was in an unstable mental state, suffering from post-war depression. The prosecution, however, countered that John had merely been going through a midlife crisis and should be held fully accountable for his actions. A psychologist testified that John acted with calculated intent, even timing the murders to ensure no 2 family members were present together. In May 1990, the judge accepted the prosecution's arguments, convicting John List of 5 counts of murder and sentencing him to life in prison without parole. Reflecting on his crimes in his final statement, John said, "I regret the tragedy that happened in 1971. I believe my mental state then made me not responsible." John spent his last 18 years in New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, where he died on March 21, 2008, at 82 from pneumonia complications. Even in his final days, he showed no remorse. For Alma, Helen, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, life was tragically and unjustly cut short. The revelation of John's true identity devastated his second wife, Dolores Miller, who could not believe the man she loved was a monster. The emotional toll of the incident weighed heavily on her and the residents of Westfield, many of whom are still haunted by the memory of the tragedy. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.